At exactly 9:01 a.m., I heard my name spoken with the sharp finality of a sentence. It echoed across a mahogany boardroom inside the 40th floor of the Chicago office tower I had helped put on the map. No one met my eyes as the new CEO Thomas Granger announced my departure in front of the firm's most critical investors. 19 years gone in a single breath. If you've ever built something just to watch someone else take the credit or sat silent while your name vanished from your own work, you'll understand what came next. My name is Marjorie Camden. I was 54 years old that morning, and for nearly 2 decades, I led Redstone Dynamics' Strategic Systems division. I started back in 2006 as a junior analyst, the kind who ran the numbers, no one double-checked and stayed late because the job needed doing. I didn't make noise, I made things work. When deadlines snapped or vendors flaked, it was me people called. Not because I demanded attention, but because I delivered. That day, the Chicago skyline glared through floor-to-ceiling windows, sunlight bouncing off every polished surface. The investors, 3 of them, sat at the far end of the table, men I had flown across oceans, with men I'd helped land deals their grandkids would benefit from. I brought them here, and now I was being erased in front of them. Granger, 10 years younger, slick-suited and rehearsed, never looked at me. Marjorie's work has been appreciated, he said, but we need leadership that reflects market speed and adaptability. Polished words for she's out and she knows too much. He called himself a visionary. I saw a man who'd never stayed up at 3 a.m., salvaging a failing acquisition. I didn't argue. I didn't blink. I nodded, folded my notes and stood. As I left, I caught Mr. Patel's eyes. He said nothing, but his fingers tapped the table twice. A habit he had when he was unsettled. By 9:29 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text. A rival firm. A meeting invite. Same investors, different project. One where my name would be on the paperwork. You don't erase 2 decades of trust with one flashy announcement. And as you're listening now, maybe at your kitchen table, maybe during a quiet walk, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Because this story, it's still unfolding. And if you've ever been underestimated, you already know how it ends. Marjorie, you've been a steady hand for a long time, Thomas Granger said, voice smooth like glass. But we need someone who takes risks, someone who moves faster. The market's shifting, and we need to shift with it. The words landed softly, but their meaning hit like a gavel. I wasn't being dismissed for failure. I was being discarded for not playing the game the way he wanted. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, letting the silence expand around me. I'd been through worse storms. This one wasn't even personal. It was tactical. Across the table, Mr. Patel gave a fleeting glance, unreadable. He adjusted his cufflink, then looked away. The others followed, silent, stiff, indifferent. In that moment, I understood this wasn't a meeting. It was an execution. No thank you. No acknowledgement. No mention of the 19 years I'd given. The nights I worked while others slept. The deals I'd saved from collapse. But I wasn't surprised. I'd seen it coming. The way Granger quietly claimed credit for my deliverables. How my name faded from agendas. The way the board stopped looping me in. You can smell your own erasure when you've been around long enough. Still knowing doesn't make it sting less. I stood calmly, collected my notes, still color-coded, still perfect, and slipped them into my leather bag. My badge corners worn company logo, faded, clipped to my coat like armor. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. No one followed. No one looked up. Just the soft tap of my heels on the marble as I walked the hall one last time. By the window, I paused. Chicago spread out below me, skyline framed in morning light. I had helped shape that skyline, projects I guided from blueprint to grand opening, memories surfaced late-night coffee runs, Christmas deadlines, the first time a client mailed me a handwritten thank you card. I remembered being told I was too cautious for leadership, then saving the firm $8 million by quietly fixing a misaligned acquisition. I thought of clients who still called for advice long after they'd left, and the birthdays I missed. The vacations I rescheduled, the silent weight of commitment. But I didn't let regret take root. I focused on the now. The warmth of sunlight on my shoulder, the steady beat of my breath. I'd always believed that power wasn't about job titles or who spoke loudest in meetings. It was about knowing your own worth, even when others tried to erase it. And I knew mine. As I walked toward the elevator, I caught the eye of the lobby security guard. He gave me a single nod. Not pity, not alarm. Just recognition. As if he knew what was happening before the rest of them did. It was a small kindness, but it stayed with me. The elevator doors slid shut, and with that quiet whoosh, the world I'd spent half my life building disappeared behind me. Downstairs, life churned on. People bustled through the lobby with lattes and briefcases, oblivious to the silence echoing in my chest. I stood still, letting it all wash over me. Not broken, not even angry, just aware. This wasn't triumph. It was clarity. Outside Chicago sparkled sunlight, dancing off glass and steel. I walked slowly, measured the morning air crisp on my skin. I imagined Thomas Granger upstairs, basking in his small victory, the board drafting a carefully worded press release, the investors quietly recalculating risk. But here's what they didn't know: I hadn't walked out empty-handed. For weeks I had prepared. Quietly? Precisely. I had secured documents, backed up emails, saved signed agreements with clauses even the legal team had overlooked. Contacts, real ones, trusted me. Some of the firm's biggest contracts bore only my signature. In certain files, no one else even knew they existed. I had seen the writing on the wall months ago. I just didn't panic. I planned. As I rounded the corner near Lake Street, my phone buzzed. A number I hadn't seen in years. A simple message. If you ever want a seat at the table, call me. I smiled, a quiet, private thing, and slipped the phone back into my coat. I didn't need to look back. The unraveling wouldn't happen with headlines or noise. It would happen where real power lives in silence. In the gaps left behind when experience walks out the door. My badge, once clipped to my coat like armor, was now just a piece of plastic in my pocket. My name likely already erased from internal systems. But I knew what they didn't. The foundation still bore my fingerprints. The deals they were banking on still leaned on the trust I had earned. And the cracks, they were coming. I didn't rush. I just kept walking. Because when the storm starts from inside the walls, no one sees it coming until it's too late. The cleanup would be swift. My name scrubbed from directories. Email access revoked. Projects reassigned like I was never there. No announcement, no farewell, just silent erasure. I pictured Thomas Granger back in that boardroom, standing at the head of the table with his signature cool delivery, assuring investors that everything was on track. Then introducing my replacement, Natalie Brooks. She'd only been with the company a year. Sharp, polished, eager. I'd watched her in meetings, always writing, always absorbing. She reminded me of myself once. But I also knew she didn't understand what she was stepping into. You can't inherit trust from a file folder. And you can't navigate power dynamics from a color-coded org chart. Inside, the gears of transition would grind forward. HR filing the exit paperwork, IT disabling access, legal drafting new authorizations, efficient, clean, and completely impersonal. I wondered if anyone, just one person, would pause to consider what was truly being lost, or if they'd just keep moving heads down, acting like I had never existed. With no real destination, I wandered the familiar streets. I stopped at a small cafe on Clark Street, a place I used to hide in during early morning crunch weeks. The barista nodded when he saw me, no words exchanged. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window. It was a strange kind of peace being unmoored, free from meetings, deadlines, decisions. The weight I'd carried for so long now felt like air. As I stirred my coffee, I thought about the files I hadn't left behind, the personal backups, the handwritten notes, the timelines only I understood. I had always been deliberate, always ready for the floor to shift. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, and if you're ready for what comes next, hit that subscribe button and walk with me into the next chapter. There were clauses only I knew how to enforce. Clients who trusted me, not the company, not a brand, me. And I knew the cracks would show. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Colin, a former colleague who left last year. Just one line, they're already asking questions. I didn't smile out of smugness. I smiled because I recognized the signs. Redstone Dynamics ran like a machine, but even the most polished systems hide rust beneath the chrome. And trust it doesn't reassign well. Back in that building, I could already imagine Natalie trying to connect the dots. But some dots, they don't connect without me. Natalie would find the files organized, the handoff notes impeccable. But beneath the surface, there'd be gaps. Questions only I could answer. Relationships only I could manage. And the investors, they'd notice. They always do. Because trust doesn't transfer by title. It's earned. And it's remembered. I finished my coffee and stepped back into the brisk Chicago morning. The city felt different. Not colder, clearer. Like I was finally seeing it without the fog of deliverables and deadlines. As I passed Redstone's tower again, I glanced up at the windows I once stared through during long nights. I wondered, was anyone looking down? Probably not. That's how these places work. People rotate in and out. Names are added, then erased. But I knew better. Every system has weak points dependencies, and I had been the one holding more than anyone realized. It wouldn't collapse today, maybe not tomorrow, but the balance had shifted the moment I walked out that door. On the train platform, the city churned around me, horns, blaring, people rushing, but I felt still. Not bitter, not defeated, just ready. Granger had handled my exit like a transaction, avoided eye contact, filled the silence with buzzwords, and the investors. Too polite to object, but far too experienced to forget. In this business, memory is currency, and I'd invested mine wisely. That afternoon, my phone buzzed again. A longtime client. He was puzzled, said the new team sounded unsure. The answers didn't line up with the commitments I'd made. He asked what happened. I kept it simple. I'm no longer with the company. Wishing you all the best. No bitterness. No explanations. Some exits speak loudest in silence. But word spread fast. By evening, more messages trickled in, clients, colleagues, even an old competitor. Some offered sympathy, others asked for guidance. A few just wanted to know the truth. I responded to each with steady detachment. I wasn't chasing validation, and I wasn't out for revenge. I was watching, quietly, and already the seams were showing. One delayed contract, one confused client, one missed expectation that once would have been second nature to me. Natalie was bright, no doubt, but bright doesn't substitute for battle-tested, and Redstone was about to learn the difference. I didn't gloat. I didn't interfere. I simply observed as the system I once held together began to wobble in my absence. It wasn't chaos, not yet, but the unraveling had begun. I kept my distance. No interference, no desire to gloat. I didn't need to prove anything. I've always believed truth reveals itself, especially in silence. And when something is built on real work, you can't erase its value with one executive decision. The cracks would widen. The questions would multiply. Sooner or later, the people who replaced me would realize what they never understood in the first place. One evening, as I walked home past Redstone's tower, the lights still burned across the upper floors. I paused. Let the memories roll in the winds, the missteps, the office friendships, the private betrayals. Nearly 2 decades of my life in that glass and steel hive. I didn't feel bitter, just clear, steady. The machine inside was still spinning, still trying to rebalance itself without the person who used to hold the frame steady. But some spaces can't be filled. Some roles don't pass along cleanly. The foundation might be buried now, but it still bore my name. I disappeared into the crowd unhurried, knowing full well the story wasn't over. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The city lay quiet, wrapped in low gray light. I sat by the window, coffee in hand, waiting not out of impatience, but preparation. By mid-morning, the first message arrived. A junior analyst from Redstone. I'd mentored her years ago, back when she was just learning how to structure vendor contracts. Now she was part of the transition team. The message was polite, but clear. We're hitting roadblocks. Can't locate a signed clause. Clients confused. Teams unsure. I let the words sit. I didn't respond. Some lessons aren't taught, they're earned. Later that day, a longtime client reached out. Calm, but frustrated. Why is the new team hesitating? Why are answers taking hours instead of minutes? I could picture the boardroom. Granger projecting confidence. Natalie flipping through briefing notes, her pen twitching, and the investors watching. Quiet, but not endlessly patient. They'd noticed the wrong coffee order, the missed pause in a sentence, the answer that should have come before the question. They always do. I didn't need to be in the room. My absence was doing the talking now. There's a distinct tension when trust vanishes like a question suspended in midair with no one sure who should answer. I imagined that tension inside the Redstone boardroom growing with every missed beat. That afternoon, I sat tucked away in a corner of the Harold Washington Library. Surrounded by the soft rustle of pages and quiet murmurs, I wasn't hiding, I was waiting. Waiting with purpose. Restraint takes discipline. Knowing when not to act is often more powerful than stepping in too soon. I opened my own archive years of notes, deal diagrams, compliance blueprints. I remembered each one clearly. I knew where the pressure points were, where the seams could split under stress. Late in the day, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. The voice was cautious, controlled. Marjorie, this is Gregory Hahn, one of the investors. He'd been in that boardroom the morning I was dismissed. He didn't bother with small talk. He needed access to a compliance document tied to an investment clause, something critical to a deal closing. I let him finish, then told him the truth. The document was secure, but it wasn't with Redstone. There was a pause. Then a quiet acknowledgement, I understand. He knew. Maybe he always had. After the call, I sat quietly watching the daylight fade through the tall library windows. Not smug, just steady. That call wasn't about a file. It was about leverage. Not the kind printed on letterhead, but the kind earned through precision foresight and knowing exactly where a foundation could crack. I had always built systems to last. But I also knew remove the wrong piece, and everything starts to shift. That evening, I walked home, past a small park, children laughing freely under the amber sky. I envied their ease, their unburdened joy. I couldn't remember the last time I felt that light. Back in my apartment, I opened a folder I'd kept sealed for months. Inside, copies of signed agreements, critical memos, handwritten notes, and one envelope addressed to myself. I ran my fingers across the edge of the paper, remembering the night I wrote it after suspicion had crept in, but before the curtain fell. I reread every word. I hadn't acted out of vengeance, just preparation. Then I sent one message to my attorney, brief and clear. Everything is ready. No need for confrontation, no shouting. I trusted what I'd built would speak for itself. And now, it was beginning to. The next morning, I received a message from Natalie. It was formal, carefully worded, almost apologetic. She asked if I could clarify a contingency clause in one of the contracts. It was causing confusion. I read her words slowly. I remembered being her once. Unsure, ambitious, afraid of making the wrong call. I almost replied, but I didn't. Some knowledge is earned, not given. As the week unfolded, the cracks widened. A key client threatened to walk unless they received written guarantees, ones I had negotiated, but which no one else seemed to understand. An internal audit flagged inconsistencies in a major project timeline, and the investors, they were growing restless. Confidence in Granger was fading. I watched from a distance, invisible, but not absent. My presence was felt only in the questions. No one could answer the delays, no one could explain. One evening, leaving a corner market, I ran into Drew, an old colleague from the operations side. He looked surprised at first, then relieved. We talked briefly, catching up in the soft light outside the shop. As we parted, he said quietly, "It's not the same without you." I smiled. Genuine, grateful. That night, I sat by the window in my apartment's city lights blinking through the glass. I thought about legacy, not the kind listed in performance reviews, but the kind people feel in your absence. The questions they keep asking long after you're gone. Redstone systems were still running, but the wheels were grinding harder now. Clients hesitated. Colleagues second-guessed. Investors pressed harder, looking for assurance Granger couldn't give. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't need to. Each unanswered email, each delayed deliverable, each question that led to more silence, those were the signals, proof of the structure I had held together. And as I walked through the streets of Chicago, I carried a kind of peace, not from revenge, but from readiness. I had prepared for this moment, and now the truth was doing its work. Passing by Redstone's building one afternoon, I paused at the corner. Through the tinted glass, I spotted Granger at the conference table, standing rigid, gesturing toward a slide deck. His shoulders tense, his voice tight. It was starting to show. The story wasn't over. Not for me, and definitely not for them. From the street, I could see him. Granger stood at the head of the conference table posture, tight gestures sharper than before. Across from him, the investors sat motionless expressions, closed patience fading fast. It's remarkable how quickly confidence crumbles. Just weeks ago, they championed his vision. Now they questioned everything. Inside, the team was stretched thin. Natalie, once bright and eager, looked exhausted. She fielded questions from all directions, flipping through notes, hunting for answers between bullet points. But the investors weren't waiting anymore. Through a former colleague, I heard they'd begun calling other firms hedging their bets, no longer betting on Granger's leadership. Loyalty had quietly turned into calculation. It didn't take long. A key client pulled out of a pending deal, citing lack of clarity. The news hit fast. What had been quiet concern turned into full-blown defensiveness. Granger scrambled to regain control. He called an emergency meeting, trying to steady the ship. But his voice, once slick and composed, now rang hollow. The harder he insisted everything was fine, the more obvious it became that it wasn't. I didn't gloat. I didn't interfere. This wasn't about one moment. It was the result of shortcuts, arrogance, and a failure to understand what kept the gears turning. The system wasn't failing because I was gone. It was failing because it never understood what I was. That evening, a message arrived. An old friend at Redstone wrote, "It feels like the ground is shifting. No one knows who to trust." I felt empathy, but also certainty. Change rarely announces itself kindly. Soon after, the board called for an independent review. The investors demanded full transparency. Leadership came under the microscope, and Granger's composure, once impenetrable, finally cracked. Then came another message. Natalie. She asked to meet for coffee, said she had underestimated what I brought to the table, that she missed the quiet clarity I had offered. I didn't lecture. I listened. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones left behind. The board's review confirmed what I already knew. Gaps in oversight, missed opportunities, rushed decisions made without proper context. The investors pulled their support, redirected funding, refocused attention. And through it all, I stayed where I was. Off stage, but present. I didn't need to return to prove anything. The unraveling told the story better than I ever could. In the end, my legacy wasn't in a title or a slide deck. It was in the silence that followed me, the kind of strength that only becomes clear after you're gone. Outside, the city lights blinked on like always. But inside Redstone Dynamics, nothing was the same. Inside Redstone Dynamics, nothing would ever quite return to what it was. And as I walked home that evening, the weight I'd carried for years finally lifted, replaced by something lighter clarity. The city lights blurred as I moved through the streets, cool air brushing my skin. I didn't need to look back. The story was already moving forward, with or without me. News of the board's review spread quickly. Granger's resignation came in a carefully worded memo. Strategic leadership transition. The investors, out of patience, pulled their funding. Redstone, once untouchable, scrambled to contain the damage. I watched from the sidelines. My name was gone from the building, but it lingered in conversations, in decisions, in memory. Clients who once leaned on my judgment began reaching out not to ask what happened, but to ask what was next. I answered them with the same quiet steadiness I always brought. No drama. No promises I couldn't keep. Then, Natalie sent a final message. She thanked me not just for the work, but for the standard I'd set. She wrote, "I understand now what it means to be the calm in a storm. I didn't feel pride. I felt peace. Some truths only reveal themselves in the aftermath." Over the next few weeks, I began to build something new. The foundation was different this time, smaller, more intentional. The partners I chose weren't the loudest in the room, but the ones I trusted when no one was watching. The work wasn't flashy, but it was meaningful. And it was mine. Now and then, I'd pass by Redstone's tower. Its mirrored glass still caught the skyline, still reflected back a company that had mistaken flash for substance. I no longer felt regret when I saw it. I didn't feel tethered. It was simply a place where I had done my best and where I had learned to let go. The world moved on. People scrolled meetings, filled decisions made. But I knew deep down the real legacy I left wasn't a title or a signed contract. It was a way of showing up, a way of leading without shouting, a way of holding the room without demanding attention. In the end, I realized the strongest victories are often the quiet ones. They don't come with applause. They come with self-respect. And I walked away, not empty, not erased, but certain of who I was and what I had built. Redstone Dynamics may have tried to erase me, may have hoped that a silent dismissal and a reshuffled org chart would bury everything I'd built. But legacy doesn't live on nameplates. It lives in the standard you set. And mine was never about titles or contracts. It was about integrity, about building things the right way, even when no one was watching, about showing up prepared, thoughtful, unwavering, when others weren't sure how to lead. That was the foundation I left behind. And as I stepped into the next chapter, no longer tethered to systems built on ego or speed, I realized something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Freedom. Not just from Redstone, but freedom to lead on my own terms. I didn't need a corner office anymore. I didn't need a corporate badge or polished elevator pitches. What I had now was clarity, a chance to build with purpose, to mentor, with intent to partner with people who value substance over spectacle. The city still moved around me, its rhythm unchanged, but something inside me had shifted. The noise didn't pull at me like it used to. I was no longer proving myself. I was shaping something new. The clients who reached out didn't ask for flash. They asked for trust, for structure, for someone who knew how to keep the gears moving when things got uncertain. And I answered, not with big promises, but with the same steady hand that had held more together than anyone ever realized. Now I lead differently. I build slowly. I measure twice, speak once, and listen always. That's the legacy I choose now. Not one built for press releases, but one built to last. So if you're reading this, or listening, or watching, and you've ever been pushed aside, overlooked, or underestimated, if you've ever wondered whether staying steady in a loud world still matters, let me tell you, it does. It always has. And if you're out there quietly building your own legacy, don't stop. Keep going, keep leading, keep listening, because some of us weren't made to chase the spotlight. We were made to build the foundation beneath it. And if that's you, then we're already on the same path. Let's keep walking. Together. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. I didn't tell it for applause. I told it for the people who've been quietly holding the line for years, the ones who do the work no one claps for, but everyone depends on. If my story reminded you of something you've lived through or something you're still facing, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me what part of this hit close to home, because your story matters too. And I promise someone else reading the comments needs to hear that they're not alone. And if I could leave you with just one piece of advice, it's this. Don't let anyone else define your worth. Not a boss, not a title, not a moment of dismissal. You know what you've built. You know what you've held together when no one else saw it. That quiet strength, that's your legacy. And no one can take that from you. So if you're building something of your own, brick by brick, late night by late night, keep going. And if you need a sign that you're on the right path, this is it. You've already started. Now, finish strong.